Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Falling Off the Floor podcast. This week we have a special guest, Lexi Wright. She is a skier. She is in recovery herself, mental health advocate, athlete on the Mountain in My Mind film team, and she is based out of Montana. But without further ado, I will let you kind of introduce yourself, Lexi.
Hi, yeah, I'm Lexi, and I think that was a pretty good introduction. But yeah, I love skiing. I don't know if I would call myself a skier very much anymore, but I am.
Yeah,
Yeah, no, I am. I love skiing. It's awesome.
yeah.
And yeah, I think I'm pretty deep in the recovery world and mental health world, and that's kind of where my focus is now, which is amazing. Yeah.
Yeah, so how did you initially get linked up with John and the guys over at Mountain in My Mind?
Um, Instagram, really. John reached out to me, and I don't think he knew much of my story, but he followed, and I saw what he was doing and heard about it from some mutual friends, and just kind of praised him because I think it's such a cool project to link, mental health and then action sports or like mountain towns, more specifically for Mountain in My Mind.
Yeah.
Um, and I told him, I'm in recovery and I had some things happen that made me have to, stop competing and all this stuff. And so I think we just hit it off, and I went to Cook and filmed with them, and they're just all of them are such wonderful people. So I'm really grateful.
Yeah, and what really is your background in skiing? Where did everything launch for you initially from Montana? Did you
Yeah.
compete? What's kind of your road with the ski industry?
So I was born in Vail. Um,
Okay.
my dad was on the U.S. ski team when he was young, and just always wanted to live in Vail, so he moved there and kind of always pushed me to be a skier. At first, he wanted me to race, and I did. I raced in Vail, and then moved to the dark side, as he would call it, and started mogul skiing.
Yep.
When
Love
we
it.
moved, yeah, we moved to Bozeman when I was 12. Um, but I mean, I remember like my dad would wax my skis in the trees, even though it wasn't allowed when I was like a little kid, and he'd just be
Yeah.
so intense about it and awesome. I mean, looking back, I was like, that was a little intense, but also I wouldn't, I wouldn't be, the skier I am. And yeah, we moved to Bozeman from Vail, and I started mogul skiing, and then when I was 14, I moved to Park City and went to the winter school
Okay.
for like my sophomore through senior year. And I did the NORAM tour and things like that, but never really made it further. I got a couple pretty bad concussions at a training camp in Canada, and that kind of, at one point, the team was like, "You're a liability, and you have to chill," because
Yeah.
I continued getting hurt, and yeah, I think there was a piece of it that was just like wanting to have like approval from my dad, and so that was
Yeah.
difficult when uh when I stopped. That was, I think, part of your story resonated with me in that. So,
For sure. I think that feeling of family pressure, especially when it comes to action sports, you had a father that obviously excelled in skiing at the highest level and making it to the U.S. ski team. And, it's funny when I think like, oh, if I have kids one day, like, oh, they're going to be skiers.
yeah.
And kind of through this podcast and over the years, I've thought, I have so many people on this podcast that say that exact same thing, that it's like I was pushed from a very young age to like do this thing.
Mhm.
And I love skiing. You love skiing, and like it's great that we had a family that pushed us to do stuff like this, but if a kid doesn't want to ski, a kid doesn't want to ski. So, you
Yeah,
know,
it's like your whole identity, and when it gets taken, I know you talked about that. It's kind of it's a shock. I think with a lot of athletes in general, like football players too, it's like, whoa, what are we
yeah.
doing?
And it's so funny. I was just talking to a friend about this yesterday. I went to the doctor last week and was like, it was a new doctor, and I'm doing all the checkups, and they're asking every question out of the book, this, that, whatever, for my file, and they're like, "Oh, have you had any back surgery, or have you had any surgeries?" And I was like, "Yeah, I've had a spinal fusion, and I broke these vertebrae in my spine." She goes, "Oh, what were you doing?" And I was like, "Skiing."
Mm.
She's like, "You don't ski anymore, right?" And I was like, "No, like I ski probably even harder than I was before. I
Yeah.
just kind of took out the solid metal and ice rock park jumps out of my repertoire and moved to like big mountain powder." And
Right.
the look that she gave me, that was like, "What are you thinking?" It's
Yeah.
I there's not a lot of sports. I mean, all athletes, no matter what sport it is, it's a love affair in so much of a sense. And like when you take that thing away,
Yeah.
if you're still able to do it, you're still going to do it. Like no matter how severe the injury or what. I mean, skiing literally took everything from me. Like friends, family, everything out of my life. And it all stemmed from skiing. And I literally couldn't wait to get back. And I I will always be a skier, no matter what. If my body allows me to ski, I will continue to ski.
Yeah.
Um, and I don't think a lot of other people, like maybe non athletes or non action sports athletes, truly understand that.
Hmm.
It's like trying to explain addiction to a normie. They
Yeah.
just, they're like, well, why can't you just stop drinking from the bottle?
Yeah.
And it's like, oh, you just clearly, there's no way to explain this to somebody that's never experienced it.
Yeah. I'm gonna have a
Um,
drink and then I'm just gonna start doing cocaine.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, they go hand in hand.
Yeah.
Um, so, we were chatting a little bit before the podcast. You are making a move here pretty soon.
Yeah.
And this is obviously like a big shift from you coming from Bozeman. Talk to us a little bit about what that move is and kind of why you're doing it.
Yeah. So I think when I first got sober, there was like 2 years where I was just in this super deep depression. I was like, oh, like sobriety's sick, and but I think there's a lot to be. I mean, that the drugs and alcohol were taken away, and that was my solution, right? So like,
Yep.
and then I also didn't have like skiing. I felt shame. I didn't have my friends. Like I felt like everybody was just gone, and that was,
Yep.
you know, I don't think it was on them at all. It was just like deep rooted shame and like, how I went out and like what people thought of me and just this perpetuating thought process that kept me from people. And I think like 2 years in I started feeling like myself again, and and so much of that had to do with going deep into trauma work and shame and like realizing my own self-worth, and then thinking about how many people there are that like are dealing with addiction, and especially so I'm going to work at a program in Austin, and they're not nonprofit, but they're really, they try really hard to make it affordable for people, and they take insurance, which is crazy that that's not the norm, but and I went there as for an internship, and every day I was unpaid, and I loved it. Every day I went there, and I was just like, it just felt really meaningful to help somebody maybe find the joy in sobriety, because I found so much joy in it. And also just like learning that I'm okay without this stuff, and that like cultivating friendships and, you know, people in my life that are here because they like love me and my heart versus like that I'm insane and I'm fun and like these things that I really believed were kind of the core of who I was, or like skiing, being a badass, you know, like I
Yep.
loved that piece. Or like,
Yeah.
you know, even dirt biking now. I'm like, am I doing this because it's cool? Or like, I mean, I
Yeah.
do love it, but I'm also like, I just want people to think I'm like badass and that gives me something. For sure it does.
Yeah.
And I think it's going to be interesting to go to to go to Texas and feel what it's like to not have these things. Granted, I'm gonna bring my dirt bike, and I'll probably like find ways to experience that. But I'd really like to, just be me and have people in my life that are there because they like they like see me and um, yeah, I think I'm really excited. And that's all to say that I'm also very excited to kind of pursue therapy and get a license. So I'll be working towards a license in chemical dependency counseling. But ideally, I'd like to work in trauma because I think that's
Yeah.
kind of the root of it all.
Amazing. I think that getting that shift out of the world that we're so comfortable in is so important. I had a therapist in Maine that totally saved my life. I attest literally my life to him, and he would drill into me every single day, Austin, you got to get comfortable being uncomfortable.
Mm-hmm.
And like I was telling you before the podcast, is that it was not comfortable moving out of Colorado and going to Portland, Maine, of all places. And that's not a comfortable thing. Like, all of my friends, everything I knew was here in Colorado, and the same thing, I'm sure you're having those same feelings that everything you've ever built and your friends and your experiences and everything are based here, in Montana. And it was a really cool experience when I finally let that set in, that it truly was, oh man, I'm comfortable in the uncomfortable now. And I feel like that's where my real growth came from, was when I really sat down and realized that the relationships and the community and everything I was building in Maine had nothing to do with my past. People weren't just friends with me because I was a good skier and I had social media following or something like that. They were truly friends with Austin for Austin. And when I got back here to Colorado, all of those people that I thought I was going to miss, I don't. Like I I got back, and a lot of those people that I was thinking about in Maine, they didn't care anymore. The life of the party, Austin, is gone. Like,
Yeah.
that's the only reason we were friends with that guy. And I'm not saying that that's your situation. It was mine.
Oh, for sure. I mean, I
That
feel
when I,
sometimes, yeah.
yeah, that I got back here to Colorado, and it was like, I've got a handful of friends from college, but 95% of the people that I knew and I considered close
Mm-hmm.
friends or acquaintances, I never spoke to them when I came back, and I wasn't missing anything. I was actually missing the people that like truly loved me in Maine,
Yeah.
and I am without a doubt sure that same experience will happen to you, where people will love Lexi for Lexi, and
Yeah.
people will love the person that you are and the things that you're building in Texas, not skier Lexi,
Right.
or not, badass action sports.
Right.
We get put into these molds, I think, throughout our life, where if someone was walking down the street, they're like, "Oh, do you know Lexi Wright? Oh yeah, the skier girl."
Yeah.
Or Austin Becker, he skis and he's got a podcast, whatever. And it's like, you get put into these molds throughout your life, that so much of our life is so much more than that.
Yeah.
And I'm actually excited for you.
Thanks. I'm excited. No, it's
Yeah.
interesting. I went to this like trauma retreat kind of thing over the summer, and it was amazing. Most of the people there were like pretty, pretty far into recovery or whatever. But you could go
Yeah.
there without being sober. But it's not like you're going there to get sober. There's nobody in active addiction.
Yeah.
Um, but it was just so much like trauma recovery and things like that, and the entire time like you were not allowed to ask anybody that you were living with for however long you were there about what they did for a living. Like that was like a you can't talk about that, which was pretty cool. You really got to know people on a deep level. And
Yeah.
yeah, and in the same vein, like I went to Wilderness when I was 17
Mhm.
for like 3 months.
Oh
And
yeah.
did you go?
No,
You just
but
know about it.
I. Oh yeah, I know
Yeah.
about wilderness programs. Yeah.
But yeah, there's a lot of negative connotation, I think, but I mean, it changed my life for sure
Yeah.
in a really positive way. But and I hope they don't go away completely. They're kind of on the outs. Um,
Yeah.
but yeah, it was amazing just backpacking for 3 months, and like you forget even what you look like you forget everything. You don't have any of these things, and you just kind of become a soul, and it's pretty cool, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I went to a program in Maine that was like kind of an outdoor adventure extended care. So most of the
Cool.
people that came there would come after wilderness because it was like people were like starting to get jobs and there was sober living, but we still had like therapists and everything. But the activities we were doing, like backpacking every weekend and traveling all throughout the Northeast, and they do an international trip every year. Like they just got back from Patagonia for a month. They were doing like trail recovery and working with like indigenous people on
Cool.
trail work and like connection, and it was a super special experience for me to not only be a client there, but then be able to be an employee there for many years.
Was that the one that you enjoyed?
Yeah, it
Yeah.
saved my life. Without a doubt, saved my life. I did so many 30-day like spin dry treatments without any sort of aftercare plan or anything. It was just like, oh, I'm 30 days sober.
Yeah.
31st day, like the drugs are back in my hand, the bottle's back in my hand.
Yeah.
And the unfortunate thing about the recovery industry is that a lot of programs, they're set up just for that because it's good for business. Like relapse is good for business, and a lot of these places that were created during the opiate epidemic were created by big pockets in New York City and Wall Street guys that saw an opportunity as an investment, and they're all set up not for long-term care, they're set up for relapse and continuing to charge insurance, and like that's what's made access to care now in 2024 so much more difficult, is that insurance companies are like,
You can't
we
keep
can't
doing
we
this.
we
Yeah.
can't keep doing this. This is crazy. And I think there's like deep seated, deep rooted stuff where insurance companies and the feds and everyone felt this immense amount of guilt for what happened with OxyContin and the Sackler family and Purdue Pharma and all of that. That there was like, okay, we're gonna like help fix this situation,
Yeah.
and we're paying for a long time, but now 20 years later, we're still dealing with the same issue, but people
Yeah.
can't get into treatment. And then all of the Medicaid or low cost treatment centers have 6 month waiting lists. And it's like that person's going to die before they get into treatment. And
Yeah. It's really, really, really difficult to understand. And then people
yeah,
are in treatment and they're like, 30 days in, and I think you need like 3 months really
oh,
to get it, or six
yeah,
months. I don't know. I was in treatment for like 6 months.
yep,
But which was such a blessing. But it's like the treatment centers don't even really go for when you're actually ready to leave. It's like, oh, the insurance company is stopping, so we're gonna
Yeah.
graduate you, you know, and um,
Yeah.
gosh, so many people die. It's so sad. It's a really, it's a really scary industry.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I tip my cap for you for going into it. I spoke to you earlier about this, that I had mixed emotions when I was leaving the treatment world. Um, I feel like it was so much of my identity as well, that like
Mhm.
my ski identity was gone. So
Yeah.
then I found this identity within the world of mental health and addiction and helping people, that when I was leaving again, it was kind of that like heartbreak in a sense, where
Yeah.
it was like,
Like
I
grief.
don't, yeah, it was grief. And it was like, how am I going to continue helping people in whatever capacity that I can, because it's something I'm passionate about. And you asked me earlier how the podcast started, and that is like a big reason why I started the podcast. Like, I make the joke that the podcast started from Amazon Prime Day, and I was like, oh, mics are cheap, so I'm going to buy a bunch of mics and camera gear, and we're going to start this thing.
Yeah.
But the idea from the start really was like, I want to still be involved in the world of mental health. And if I can find listeners, that if one person listens to this podcast and they put down the bottle, for maybe they didn't relapse today because they
Yeah.
listened to the podcast. And like John was mentioning in his episode of the podcast, that the emails and support that he gets, like after a premiere, or someone sees the movie and they send him a message like, you took literally the gun out of my hand today. Like,
Yeah.
your premiere saved my life. That is some really deep shit.
Yeah.
And there are moments that I'm like, God, this is a lot of work doing this podcast. And you think like, I own a business as well, and it's like opportunity cost. Like, what, what is this doing? And it's for those messages. It's
Yeah.
for the email that you randomly get from a listener of the podcast, or a comment on social media. Like, you have no idea how much this means to me, and like, please,
Something really hit.
I
Yeah.
can't monetarily help you, but I hope this is saving people.
Oh.
Um,
Well, yeah, I mean,
so
it's really amazing.
that keeps me doing this. It keeps you and John making films. Like, nobody's making money here. Nobody's
Yeah.
making money on the Mountain in My Mind crew. Like, everyone is just doing this because we believe that this message should get pushed to a bigger audience. And the action sports world, nobody wants to, for some reason, talk about this subject. There is very few of us in the world of action sports. You know, the Olympics are on right now, and they've got like skateboarding and mountain biking and all these action sports, and you think like, oh my God, these people are Olympians. Like,
Yeah.
they're the
They
kings and
haven't
queens
played.
of the world. They
Yeah.
haven't made, they have everything figured out. And it's like, no, action sports are, especially action sports,
Yeah.
people are putting their life on the line for something that they love, like
Yeah.
every single day. Like, hitting X Games and Olympic park jumps, that you're every single time you hit that jump, there is a possibility like something can go wrong.
Mhm.
And you don't think that way when you're dropping into a big air course or a mogul course or race course, but like, yeah,
Yeah.
subconsciously, like, it's in the back of our mind. And that does play into people's mental health. And I think, that intersection of action sports and mental health is such an important thing to talk about.
Yeah. Well, it's
Because there's a
interesting.
lot of me and you.
Oh yeah. No, it's really interesting the more I've been digging into trauma. And have you ever read The Body Keeps the Score?
I haven't actually.
No.
I've
Check it
Many
out.
people have mentioned this book.
Yeah.
Now I've got a long drive coming up, so I'll do the
Listen.
audiobook.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's how I listened or read it. I guess I didn't read
yeah,
it. I heard
yeah,
it. Yeah, but the more I've been delving into trauma, and I think the reason that, the wilderness program was so impactful for me was that it was so trauma informed, and a lot of these like regular, regular treatment centers, I don't, regular is not the right word, but that aren't super well funded are not trauma informed, and they're just kind of like, a lot of them are shame based, which is really sad because, addicts, all we need is just like a little bit of love. And,
Yeah.
You go to a treatment center, you're trying to figure yourself out, and just being told this like super shameful message of like who you are and you have to figure it out. And I think going back to trauma, that as I look into what happens when we're in a traumatic experience, which I think most people have trauma in their past, whether it's like, like small things, but we all kind of figure out how to deal with like our inner dialogues in some way. And I think, at least for me, I shouldn't speak for everybody, but for me, action sports, like, it's the only time for a long time until I started working on my trauma and like doing some work, with yoga and breath work and EMDR and things like that. For a long time, the only time I felt calm and safe in my body was when I was skiing and like, or dirt biking or doing, anything like that. And that's still true, but I can find like a regulated nervous system outside of that. And it's like, oh my gosh, when I first realized that was a possibility without, having this risk, it's, I probably cried when I first felt like calm in my body. I was like, whoa, I can feel this way, like without like going 40 miles an hour,
Yeah.
And that's so cool. And I think that I don't know what you think, but I feel like there's a correlation with action sports and like, I mean, obviously you think there's a correlation, but with mental health and action sports. And it's it's another solution, I think, and a much better one than drugs and alcohol. But yeah, I don't know. I think we're always going to continue trying to find solutions. And I'm so grateful that my solution is, going really fast, or going to a yoga class, or like breathing super intensely till I can like get to a euphoric state,
Yeah.
Which is all kind of weird, but it's amazing. And it's all like, all of these things are also ways to like turn your parasympathetic nervous system back on when you're in like a trauma response, right?
Yeah.
Which happens all the time.
I think that intersection of any sort of action sport and mental health, as I was speaking on earlier, is not talked about really at all.
Yeah.
And I think anyone in action sports is struggling to some capacity.
Mm-hmm.
It's a scary thing that we're doing, and you're kind of always in that fight. You're never really calm,
Mm-hmm.
especially like if you're like a competition X Games skier and you're like touring, there's
Mm-hmm.
never an off button. There's never that like, oof.
Yeah.
And you are that response in your body, that parasympathetic nervous system, everything is like you are turned up.
Mm-hmm.
And you do that long enough, it's almost similar to drugs. Like
Oh
we're
yeah.
doing drugs and everything is ramped up, ramped up, ramped up, ramped up. And then we take those drugs away and it's like super down, depressed, everything, the world comes crashing in on you. So you do the drugs again. And action sports are the same way.
It's just
We get this thrill and this dopamine and this rush, and especially like when you're in the heart of a ski season and you're traveling and skiing and this and filming, you're kind of constantly online.
Yeah.
This season was gone for almost 4 months straight. Like I wasn't in my own bed for 3.5 months, and end of March, yeah, end of March rolled around, and I could feel that
Mm.
like constant go go go. There was never, I would still like go to a yoga studio or go to a rec center and like sit in a jacuzzi and breathe or work out and like try and calm things down, but it's like a 45-minute section in my day, and the rest of it was like, let's go,
Yeah.
let's go, let's go. By the end of it, I was reaching a point that I was like, I had some more trips planned. I was supposed to go film in Jackson Hole. I was
Mm.
supposed to go to California for this like mega storm that they got, and I just I got to go home and like hug my cat
Just
and
relax.
lay in bed and like get back to my own routine. Um, because routine, I think, is another important thing for people in recovery. Is that like a wandering mind, an empty mind for an addict, especially in early recovery, is that's a scary place to be.
Yeah, it's a
Uh,
recipe for
a
a
recipe for
nightmare.
relapse.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and I think for so many years, that's how it was. Like when I was living in Maine, it was constant. I
Yeah.
was replacing the drugs with the gym. Like
Mhm.
I went when I first got into recovery, it was like insane gym, like these crazy eating habits and like weighing my food and working out every single day. And it was like,
Yeah.
yeah, that was actually fine at the time. But then I I started to realize like this is kind of crazy. Um,
Uh,
I
yeah.
like going out to dinner. Like I'm a foodie. I love food. I grew up in like a very food centric household, and I'm literally eating like chicken and rice that's been diced and weighed on scales and counting macros and in the gym 2 3 times a day. And
Yeah.
it's that I don't think that was a bad thing at the time. Like it gave me that routine of there was no quiet moments in the day. It was like I woke up, I'd go down to the therapy offices, check in. They would have like meditation and yoga, and
Mm.
we'd be in groups. And then it was like gym, work, and that that kept me pretty grounded for my first like 9 months to a year.
Yeah.
And that's not sustainable forever.
Right.
And we're always going to be looking to replace the drugs. We're always going to be looking to replace the skiing. You're going to get to Texas, and there's going to be a level of you like, fuck, did I just make a terrible decision? And,
Yeah.
you'll doubt yourself and you'll think, how am I going to replace that? And for us, like, no matter how long you're sober, that that thought always comes into your head. No matter, you could be 25 years sober
Yeah.
and you still have that thought of like, oh, I could just go to the bar right
I
now.
think you're fine. Yeah.
Yeah, it's fine. Just one drink. I'll
Yeah.
go out with everyone. It'll be fine.
Yeah.
I think I tell people this all the time.
God,
Yeah,
our minds.
I, I tell people this all the time. Like if I go out to dinner and I'm just meeting someone and they realize I'm not drinking. Oh, is it okay if I drink in front of you? And it's like, oh yeah, yeah, it's totally
Like,
fun. Like
please
you
do.
drinking,
Yeah.
yeah, you drinking doesn't get me drunk.
Right.
And I I think that throughout any portion of our life,
Yeah.
that thought is always going to be there. The thought of I can have a drink right now is going to be there, but with
You know it.
time,
Yeah.
the shift happens where we're not like jumping and making that action. It's way quicker. It's like 2 seconds. You could have the thought and you're like, oh no, that's crazy. And then you keep going with your day.
Yeah.
Maybe 6 months sober, you have that thought and you're jumping on it. Like if you don't have that support system or community or people around you to talk about these things, that is the action. Like
Right.
you go to the liquor store, you go to the drug dealer. That's how we cope with it, and over time, that goes away. So
Isn't it? It's pretty cool how we can learn things from just continuing to practice. I think that's what, I've been doing that I mean, I obviously did that for a long time with sobriety, and it's kind of come to the point now. I mean, it is at the point now where I don't think about it, like about
Yeah.
drinking. It's like, and that's a blessing. Sometimes, yes. And then I can kind of slow down, play the tape back, and I'm like, okay, that's
Yeah.
play the tape forward. And I'm like,
Yeah.
that's gonna be not great. And now, like, I think I do that with my mental processes. Like when sometimes I like will go into a social situation and I get really socially anxious. Like I have to really like pump myself up to go do something, which
Hmm.
like I'm like, okay, I gotta go and be around people, and I get nervous, and then I'm there, and I was nervous for this podcast. I'm here, and I'm like, oh, this is great. We're having a great time.
Yeah. You're killing it.
Thanks, you too.
Yeah.
But like these mental processes, like when that just happen automatically, and it's like I know that it's coming from this like child consciousness inside of me that is like, oh, you're not good enough, or this, these people don't want you around, or like everybody thinks you're weird, and I go into a room and I'm like, immediately those thoughts come into my head, and I have to really actively go into my adult self and be like, hey, you're fine, like, everything's fine, and kind of
Yeah.
do that. And it's like, sometimes I talk to my therapist about it. I'm like, when will that just like be an automatic thing where I don't go into that? Like these mindsets of like, of like really, really child conscious mindsets of like where I was when I maybe had some traumatic thing happen and built this idea. And she's just, all it is repetition. And then eventually, hopefully, I won't have to like come in and redirect my thinking and be like, no, people do want you here, or like it's okay, like you're there's no shame right now, or it's okay. It's like these it's pretty amazing. And I think that having recovery and knowing how that happens, where you start to kind of be able to have like thought and not just go right to a bottle, that's so cool to be able to have that past experience and be like, oh, my mind can like change the way that I think, and the way that you know these automatic thought processes can change with repetition, and like
Absolutely.
so cool.
Yeah. I I recently got back to doing yoga, which was a thing that I learned in early recovery. Most rehabs, it's like
Yeah.
meditation and yoga. And when we first get there, it's like, yoga? Are you serious?
You think
This
I'm gonna
is,
do that?
yeah, this is what's going to get me sober?
Yeah.
Like, get the fuck out of here.
For me.
And as I kept doing it, I was like, whoa,
Yeah.
this thing actually works.
Hmm.
Maybe this is why this has been used for centuries and centuries in history, and breath work goes back to like basically the dawn of time.
Yeah.
And the United States were the quick fix country.
Hmm.
We sell and take in more pharmaceutical drugs than any other country on the planet Earth, and our population is nowhere near the population of other continents and countries and places, but we're the country of quick fixes.
Yeah.
So in yoga and meditation, these more Eastern kind of medicines, in a sense, have
Yeah.
been used for centuries, and they're way more effective than any drug that I've ever used.
Yeah.
And
And people don't like
I,
that.
yeah, it's so, for so many people, it's so much easier, and I fall prey to it all the time. It's so much easier to like, oh, I can just get a psychiatrist and they'll just give me, oh, my back hurts, they'll give me Oxycontin, it's fine.
Yeah.
Oh, I've got anxiety, they'll give me Xanax. Like, everything's fine.
Mhm.
Everything's fine. And I'm, I still take pharmaceutical drugs. I have a psychiatrist, I have a
Yeah.
therapist, and there are certain levels of, drugs that are super beneficial, that are not psychoactive and don't, mess with an addict in any way.
Right.
Uh, But those little things like yoga and meditation and just finding a way to like quiet this crazy mind of mine,
Hmm.
um, this podcast, like podcasting with people and creating community. I just met you. I've never spoken to you in my
Yeah.
life, and I'm sitting across from you, and like we have this ability to have this conversation about things we normally wouldn't talk about,
Yeah.
with someone walking down the street. Like if I just saw you walking down the street, it'd be like, "Oh, hey, why don't you tell me all about your addiction and
Yeah.
recovery?" You'd be like, "This guy's fucking crazy."
Like,
Like,
whoa,
what?
man.
So,
So if it's pretty, yeah, I'd probably be like, okay, let's go. Just kidding.
okay, yeah, sure, okay.
You're right.
I think there are so many things that are helpful. Um, I I was given yesterday probably the best compliment I've ever been given in my life. And in the moment I didn't really think about it, but I was going to dinner with my friend Sarah, and she said, I was out with Jessica last night and we were talking, and she was like, I just want to like compliment you. And I was like, okay. And she was like,
Aw.
you have this ability of bringing people together and create community in no way that I've ever seen it with anyone else. And she was like, you were such a good friend to have here in Colorado. And I was like,
Aw.
whoa. And
So sweet
you-
that she
in
said
the,
it too.
in the moment, I was like, wow, that thank you so much. And I literally left dinner and was like thinking about it, and then woke up this morning and was thinking about it, and it's like community has saved my life.
Yeah.
Like, I probably say this every single podcast. My favorite quote from this TED talk, you probably saw it in rehab, is the opposite of addiction is connection.
Oh yeah. Love that.
And that it's such a simple, simple, simple thing that has been so true in my life. The opposite of addiction is connection.
Yeah.
And no matter what that connection is, it could be my 75-year-old therapist in Maine, it could be Lexi Wright, it could be John Padilla, it could be my friend Sarah, anyone. Building that connection in that community has truly saved my life. And building it outside of the box. My box has always been skiing, action sports, smoke weed, party harder,
Yeah.
ski hard, party harder. Like that's what my whole life has been. So like building this community outside of the box has been, it still saves my life to this day.
Yeah.
The people that I've surrounded myself with, I don't know what I would do without them. And that's why I was like so attracted to everything that you guys did with The Mountain in My Mind and everything that John created, because that is like literally my whole thing is like creating community and using a platform that John looked at it, you looked at it, was like, well, maybe we're not like superstar X Games guys or we're not in the Olympics, but we all have this one thing in common, skiing, and then we all have this one thing in common, being advocates for something that we believe in mental health and addiction, and using that as the platform. And you don't have to be Lindsey Vonn. I don't have to be Bobby Brown,
Right.
but we can use this platform as our jumping ground to reaching a larger audience, that people listen to this podcast that have never skied before in their life,
It's amazing.
like ever. But
Yeah.
that gave me the jump start to reach those audiences. And community is everything to me.
Yeah.
And, it's very apparent that community is huge for you and John and everyone, involved in your crew.
Yeah.
It's what makes your film successful and good.
Yeah, that The Mountain in My Mind. That was such a cool experience. Um,
Yeah.
he reached out and I was kind of yeah, really nervous. I didn't know anybody that was going to be there, and just going up and filming and staying in Cook for a week and talking about mental health. I was like, what am I going to talk about? Like, I don't know. And just the warmth and the everybody in that group of people were just they are so amazing. And I think I have some lifelong friends through that. And it just, what John is doing is so amazing. And I don't think he realizes even. I know he does realize the impact, but I don't think he really realizes how much of an impact it's had on all of us that are in it too. And I feel so grateful to have that group of people, as I consider them pretty close friends now. And it's pretty rare to get people that'll go super deep, like get really vulnerable and go deep emotionally, and especially like a bunch of sled neckers. I was like, what are we doing? And everybody was just so kind and welcoming, and didn't care that like I was, sober. Everyone's like, that's awesome. And like that's just something that it's rare, especially in the ski industry. I feel like, not that people really care, but sometimes you can feel like not a part of. And I think that community, I felt so welcomed and loved, and that's really what they do for everybody,
Yeah.
to promote community. So
Yeah.
you got to come out sometime next year.
Yeah, John and I have talked about that. Now that he's coming down to Colorado, I will absolutely come join you guys.
Cool.
Down in southern Colorado, I spent a lot of time in the Silverton area this winter, and it forever has my heart.
Really?
It is the
Silverton's
skiing,
on I-70, right?
kind of. So Silverthorne, I
Oh,
think a lot of people get.
yeah.
Yeah. So Silverton is way south. It's about 7 hours from Denver. There's this little town called Ouray, and then Red Mountain Pass, which is literally just the breeding ground of big mountain backcountry skiing. I was I was literally a kid in the candy shop, to the point that my business partner and videographer Jordan was like, dude, you gotta shut up. I'm like sitting there with a guidebook in the passenger seat like, oh my god, that's red too, and there's that line, and there's the prospector zone. Like, I was like freaking out. Kid in the candy shop.
Tour guide for sure. Like, oh, and over
Yeah.
that's awesome. And John
And
come ski with you there?
yeah, he was mentioning on his episode that they're going to be filming down in that zone in southern Colorado and Silverton and Wolf Creek Pass, which is another, just you're driving along and it's just like googly eyes. The unfortunate thing about this wonderful state that I live in is that our snow, very similar to Montana, is very unstable.
Mm-hmm.
And it's hard to find those windows where you can be like, all right, this is feeling pretty safe on like big lines.
Right.
I think I got away with a couple. I went a really good weekend, kind of middle of spring, where things were starting to settle up, and we rented a house in Ouray, and there's a big crew of us, and we were down there filming, and you can get lucky like that in Colorado, but for the most part, like middle of winter, you're not skiing massive lines. It's pretty sketchy out here, especially in that zone. Yeah, it's just cold, and the snow never settles, and we get all these persistent layers that make big mountain skiing difficult. It's fun to look at, and I could sit there for hours and just googly eye every single line, but we did get pretty lucky on a couple big lines, and yeah, Silverton forever has my heart. I'm literally, like, the background of my computer right now it's actually a photo from Alaska that I took, and it's crazy the contrast between skiing big mountain in a place like Silverton than going to like a maritime snowpack in Alaska, where we got to Alaska, they're having the most insane winter ever early on. So we're like, we got to get to Alaska. And we're skiing like 55-degree pitches with blower snow that is like bulletproof. Like,
Wow.
we obviously, we're out there digging pits, and even on a green light day, like you got to
Yeah.
go through your steps to make sure it's a go. But I mean, we felt like we were getting away with murder, and
That's
because
awesome.
coming from Colorado, it's like you're not. The snow doesn't even stick at 55 degrees in Colorado; it just gets blown off. In Alaska, you could be perfectly vertical walls, and there's 300 inches of snow just packed on it.
Oh,
And
that sounds amazing.
yeah, Alaska was a big bucket list check off for me. We are going back this winter. I
What did you
so
do there?
much
Did
of
you like hike or did you what did you do?
we toured everything.
Okay, nice.
Um,
That's awesome.
yeah, so I mean, I'm not going to count my chickens before they hatch, but I'm talking to the company Heli right now,
I was gonna say you gotta get
about
out there. That'd be sick.
and they're looking for like athletes and ambassadors, and I have a meeting with them this week. So that would be pretty incredible.
It's gonna happen.
Because
Well,
gotta manifest that shit.
I know. We'll manifest
Um,
that for you.
yeah, Alaska is that was I think like the pinnacle of my skiing, and that was like a special moment, like standing on top of some of these peaks, thinking to myself like, "Whoa, I was homeless shooting
Mm.
heroin in Boston 7 years ago. I was like literally on the streets shooting heroin, and
Uh,
now I'm standing on top of the biggest spine line I've ever seen in my life, and there's a film crew at the bottom radioing to me at the top of a mountain to drop in to this insane line.
yeah.
It was a very emotional trip for me, and it was weird because I'm like with a bunch of people that aren't in recovery, um, and I don't. No one will truly ever understand that. Like we were talking earlier, what it's like to be in an active
Yeah.
addiction or an addict.
Right.
That emotional piece maybe they didn't fully understand, but it was like that was a pretty special moment, and doing it with like my closest friends and getting to the bottom and like watching my closest friends drop into these lines and come down, and they're just like out of control joy.
Just
Hey,
laughing and smiling,
yeah,
yelling.
it's
It's
yeah,
awesome.
oh, a lot of yelling, a lot of screaming, crying. I fucking love you, bro.
Oh,
A lot of that.
that's
And
amazing. And like, isn't it like 1% of heroin users get sober? So it's even that's
yeah,
so incredible.
yeah.
Really,
It all started with my back injury and OxyContin,
yeah,
and
that's such
the
a common.
OxyContin ran out, and I learned that fentanyl and heroin were the street version of what I was addicted to from the pharmacy, and I went down that path for some time, and yeah, as I I look back at my past and like that doctor yesterday or 2 days ago looking at me like you're extremely lucky to even be walking. Like
Yeah,
the specific vertebrae that I broke in my upper back, it's you've got a very very small likelihood of not being paralyzed, and I got super lucky.
yeah,
And
something
like
working out for you, probably.
yeah,
Yeah,
something was watching out for me. Someone was watching out for me, like in getting clean and now being able to experience the life that I get today. Um, Getting to have a conversation with you or John or Benny or any of these guys, like sitting across from you guys and being able to talk about it now is like, that's a pretty special thing that we have in common. That I don't think a lot of, like you said, 99% of heroin users won't get to have that conversation.
yeah,
And that's,
It's
a
amazing.
weird place thinking that I'm like the 1%. And it
Hmm.
also makes me think like I got over that back injury. I got past addiction. I've had a lot of other injuries and like scary life experiences. Like if I'm a cat, I'm definitely on my ninth life.
Well,
So
are your
I'm gonna
parents
soak
like,
this one up.
are your parents in the recovery world at all? Do they understand it?
They understand it now. Um, you know, I learned from you that it runs in your family. It runs in my family.
Yeah.
My grandfather committed suicide with a bottle of Jack in his hand. Jack Daniels. I
Oh,
never met him. It was passed on to my dad, and I would say that he like addiction runs in his blood. So he's
mm,
had these like periods in his life where heavy drinking was the answer, and then realized like, oh yeah, no, and was like able to shut it off.
mm,
Where um, he'll still drink a beer and have a glass of wine, but he's not like chugging vodka.
right.
Um, and my sister has been in and out of rehab for God as long as I can remember.
That's difficult.
Unfortunately, she has been doing this. She's been to more rehabs than you can even imagine. Uh, and, every therapist in the world says you got to let them figure it out on their own.
Oh, it's so hard. Like not knowing that you have no control and that it's, whenever somebody else wants to change, not even wants, that's the wrong word because it's not.
Yeah,
Um,
I feel like there's always a want to change. It's
yeah.
just not having the ability to. Um, and, she's always had a blanket to fall into. And I've done a lot of trauma work, things I saw as a kid
Yeah.
that that she was doing. When I first got into recovery, it was like, well, I was doing the same thing. Let me be a support system to her, and the same thing kind of kept happening and happening and happening, and it's soup. She lives in Aspen. She
Yeah.
lives literally a few hours from me, and I haven't seen her in 10 years.
Oh,
Um, and yeah, that it
that's-
it weighs heavy on you.
oh yeah.
The
She knows
same
right
way
where it's
that
from.
yeah,
Right.
and the same way that it weighed heavy on your parents and my parents.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
There's addiction in the moment. We think it's only affecting Austin and Lexi,
Right.
but we're a wrecking ball
Oh my
when we're
God.
using,
Yeah.
and
Gosh.
it's addiction is a fickle thing that I don't think anyone truly, unless you've actively experienced it, will ever understand.
Yeah.
Um, I think what you're doing is really cool and really needed. We need more actual addicts
Mhm.
and alcoholics moving into the space of recovery because you can only learn so much from a book. A doctor can only learn so much about addiction from a book and getting a bunch of letters after their name.
Right.
I went to a program in Maine that every single employee was a either an alumni of Foundation House or one of their sister programs. They
Wow.
hire only internally. The COO of the company that's you would never guess. He went through Foundation House 10 years ago and
It's just
worked
like
his way
weird.
up to the COO of a pretty major company now.
Yeah.
Um, and my therapist, he went through the program and he did the same thing as you. He went, back to New York City where he's from, went to school, started getting credentials, and then same thing, started interning for Foundation House in Maine and got his credentials, and he's been a therapist there for 15 years.
Wow.
Um, and that connection of you could say literally anything to me, and I've probably done it in some capacity, and
Right.
I would understand that. And the same thing is going to happen when you're working with clients in Texas. these people are going to tell you things, and you're going to actually know it firsthand. Right. Not from a textbook, not from a PhD or an MD. You were literally in their shoes. And right. I wish that's how the whole industry was, that it was all self, run. But there is a need for doctors and nurses and other points of view outside of just the addict point of view.
Right.
So, yeah. So I hope you are going to make a difference, Lexi. And I know this is terrifying, what you're doing, and you're leaving your comfort zone.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep. But yeah.
You got it.
Thanks.
Yeah. A lot of people don't get this opportunity.
Mm-hmm.
It's pretty special what you and I can do today. I've been to more funerals than I can count on my fingers and toes, just from being in the world of addiction and mental health for all these years. Like, I feel like it's almost a monthly thing. You get a call. Oh, you're so-and-so. Do you remember that guy from years ago?
Yeah.
The client at Foundation House, or the client at this program, or wherever. Oh yeah, he just passed away. And it's like, whoa. And you almost become like numb to it.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Yeah, it's easy to be like, to kind of forget the magnitude of addiction when you're outside of it a little bit. And then things like that happen, and you're like, or somebody that's been sober for a really long time relapses, and you're just like, wow, yeah. Okay, it's a pretty big deal, and it's scary.
Yeah. So, Lexi, we're coming up on our hour mark, and you'll understand this. A lot of people that aren't in recovery that I say this to don't really understand it. I do this at the end of every podcast. Do you have any burning desires, any last things that you want to share with the audience before I let you go?
I mean, I think just that if anyone's struggling with mental health and can't see that there's another side, there is, and it's just waiting, and you can get there.
Yeah, there always is light at the end of the tunnel, no matter how difficult life can get. Even if it takes 10 years to figure it out, I look back at things now that it's like, oh, yeah, that's why that happened.
That's exactly why that happened.
Yeah.
It's the end of the world, and then you're like, oh, I'm fine.
Yeah, I'm fine.
Oh, cool.
Well, thank you so much for coming on today.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you to all the listeners. Your support on this podcast means the absolute world. And if you guys need anything, Lexi, do you want to share your socials? People can get in touch with you.
Yeah. My Instagram is SwerveMasterLex.
Love.
With a U. But yeah, you can always reach out for sure.
Amazing. And I'll put all your info kind of in the note sections.
Whatever you want. Cool.
Amazing. Alrighty. Thank you so much to all the listeners. We are out.